And of course, we look at the wealth of information, financial, statistical that's on the internet. And we come up with this index. And this year, Panama came out atop again.
And why is that?
It's always in the top 5 or 6 because
it ranks within the top rankings of most of those categories. For instance, it's very affordable, it's close to the U.S., and it has an accommodating climate where accommodating means no ice and snow. Really.
I like that.
Yeah, right. We do too.
Yeah, coming from the Midwest.
Healthcare is excellent.
And they've been dealing with North Americans for a century because of the canal.
Life's Third Act is a podcast dedicated to helping you get the most out of your retirement. Sponsored by TuckerAllen, Attorney-CPA Joe Cordell features guests each week to discuss prominent topics for those over 55. Here's Attorney-CPA Joe Cordell.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. We want to bring you guests today that these are returning guests. And these guests you all found very interesting because I think that they appealed to that adventurer that's in all of us when we think about, gee, what are some of the wild and crazy or bold and different things that I might do when I retire, where I might live especially. But yet a lot of us either don't get around to it or we just dismiss it as saying, no, that's not realistic. So we want to emphasize the fact that, as this show suggests, the third act can be and should be the best, the most exciting. And in order for that to be true, that means you should be doing something different from what you've done historically. So we wanted these guests to come back, and we're going to talk about some different ways that you might view retirement and some different ideas as to where you might spend retirement. And in fact, we might say very different from what many of you were thinking.
That's an understatement.
You can introduce our guest, Jill.
Yes, our guest returning, as Joe Cordell said, Suzan Haskins and her husband, Dan Prescher. Both are senior editors for internationalliving.com, and they've authored a couple of books. One of those is The International Living Guide to Retiring Overseas on a Budget. Thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I have to tell you, I came across International Living as a newsletter, kind of a little magazine almost. Must have been, I don't know how far you all go back, but I think this was 15 or 20 years ago. And I would go into the library at lunch, and when I was taking a lunch break I was practicing as an attorney at the time, and it was just relaxing. I would look through it. I'd fantasize about these different places. You would list some of the options of where you can consider retiring, the pros and cons. You talked about everything from crime to cost of living, et cetera. And I just found it fun to look at it and think about the possibilities. Now, so far, I've not yet done an international move, although I've traveled a lot. I love to travel internationally. But this topic interests me, and I think it will interest our guests. Have you seen in the last 15 years an increase in the level of interest in living abroad?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
It's the internet has kind of changed everything. We've only been with International Living for about 2 decades, but
only
the newsletter you guys have been talking about has been around for more than 40 years.
Yeah. Wow.
So people have always known that there was an option to live less expensive, more exotic, kind of happier life abroad. But since the inception of the internet, people can just get on and look up people who are doing it. I mean, they might have friends who are living in Thailand or Brazil or someplace in Mexico. And, nowadays you can join a Facebook group of people who are living in a particular place. So in the last, I'd say since the inception of the internet, it has really burgeoned a lot.
Right. I think with exactly what you're saying, but also it's easier to book travel. It's easier to fly right now. I mean, than it has been, say, 2 decades ago. You can get online, you can book your travel. You don't have to have, travel checks anymore. You can ATM machine, you can get cash when you land at the airport. Everything has just gotten so much easier as this idea of retiring overseas has become more accessible.
Yeah, and of course, we have to accept the last 2 years because nothing has been easy the last 2 years, except getting on the internet and exploring these things. So we think there's a huge pent-up demand of people who've been researching this for 2 years going, man, when we can fly again, I am out of here.
I'm going.
Right.
And some countries, though, I would suspect, particularly maybe some Caribbean countries, maybe some Latin American, are less restrictive about travel maybe in COVID than others. Is that true?
Right.
We were just talking about this yesterday.
Mexico has absolutely no requirements, no vaccine or proof of a negative COVID test required. Other countries have varying levels of requirements, but
and it changes every day.
It does,
Right.
Nobody knows what it's going to be like tomorrow or next week. But.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about where you're living now and how long you've lived there and what your thoughts are about that.
This will be interesting.
Yeah, we are pretty much roving right now. I mean, because of the pandemic, we've spent most of the last 2 years in the United States, but we are residents of Mexico. And we were sort of between households when the pandemic started. So when this is all over, you can expect to see us firmly back in Mexico. We're still trying to decide exactly where that will be, but we know we will be at least part-time in Puerto Vallarta on the Pacific coast.
Yeah, but Mexico's a big place. It's at least a dozen different good retirement and second home markets. So we've got to decide exactly what we want to do when everything clears up.
Yeah, we've lived in three different places in Mexico. So Mexico is and will be our permanent home eventually.
And that's an example, though, of I think one of the advantages of retiring maybe in this area of the world versus Europe is that you are so close to, familiar medical care, familiar, family, et cetera. So when something like this comes along, which hopefully not in our lifetime or our children's lifetime again.
Right.
But at least it means that if you're living abroad and you're in Mexico, you jump on a plane and you come back and maybe you stay here for a while if you think it's better.
And which for people on the East Coast is kind of the same story with Europe. I mean, Portugal is on our global retirement index. There are some wonderful European countries that from the East Coast of the United States aren't much farther away than parts of Mexico or Central America. So it depends on, the U.S. is a big place too. It depends on where you live.
Now, where have you been staying in the U.S. during the pandemic?
When we left the U.S. 20 years ago, we were living in Omaha, Nebraska, which is where our son and our grandchild live right now, our son, daughter-in-law, who's from Panama, by the way. And we both have elderly parents right now. So we're kind of right in the midst of where they are in Omaha.
So we're dealing with all those third age issues that come up.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know. That's a period. It's a challenging period where you have lots of responsibilities. And when I think about Mexico, though, I know it's got an unfair rap. People tend to want to paint it with a broad brush. But others have told me that there are some very safe places in Mexico and that it's like a variety of different environments rather than one.
Yeah, Janet Blazer, a previous guest, lives in Mazatlan, and she said it's very safe.
Yeah, that's
remember?
Right. Right.
So talk about some of the areas you like best in Mexico or you think would be great places to consider for retirement.
So many.
Oh, man. Well, Puerto Vallarta obviously is one of our favorite places, and we'll be part-timing there soon when the travel restrictions are lifted and all things become equal. But we've lived in Ajijic, Lake Chapala, south of Guadalajara in the central part. We've lived in
San Miguel de
Allende up in the highlands. And we've lived in, right now, we are residents of Merida in Yucatan, the Yucatan Peninsula. A place that we lived for years and years. And all of those places, depending on what neighborhood you live in, we found statistically safer than many places in the United States. It just depends on what neighborhood you choose.
And generally the beach communities, at least the tourist beach communities, tend to be safe, don't they?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, like everywhere in the world, you will always have a certain amount of crime. That I don't think there's anywhere where you are going to be totally crime free.
But it's property crime, isn't it? It's not violent crime for tourists.
Yeah, it's crime of convenience.
Right.
Pretty much.
Money changes everything. And when expats with a relative high income compared to the locals move into some place, that changes things. That changes the economic outlook. But as far as Mexico goes, we can honestly say that just like the United States, if you don't live somewhere where drugs are processed, shipped, or transferred or sold, you're as safe as you are anywhere else on the planet. Mexico has the dubious distinction of being next door to the biggest illegal drug market on the planet, which is the United States. And those economics can't be ignored. But there are places in Mexico that have nothing to do with that trade. Those are the places we like. Those are the places we feel perfectly safe.
So what other countries in Central America do you like?
Well, we've lived in Panama, which actually is the top ranked country on our global retirement index. We lived there for a year. Our son was visiting us, and that's where he met his now wife. Not Central America, but we've also lived in Ecuador and would happily go back there any time. The reason we left Ecuador to move to Mexico was to be closer to our son and his family and our now grandchild, which we didn't have before. Mm-hmm. So Mexico has become a place of convenience for us. But if we were to do it all over again, you might find us back in Ecuador because we just really enjoyed our time there.
And there was a wonderful six or 8 months in Nicaragua.
Believe it or not.
On the coast in Nicaragua.
So talk a little bit about Panama, though, why you've ranked it number one out of all the countries in the world right now. And tell us about your travel index first.
Well, the Global Retirement Index is something that International Living has been doing every year for
a long time.
As far back as you can remember, right?
Yeah.
And we just talk to our correspondents and editors who are living the expat life around the world, about what they like about the places they live, what's on their radar, which countries are coming up on the radar, because everything changes. Visa requirements change, economics change, governments change. And every year that list gets juggled a little bit, but we have 10 things right now that we judge a country by: affordable housing, retirement benefits, how easy it is to be a resident, get a resident visa, entertainment, development, climate, healthcare, opportunity, all kinds of different things. We crunch the numbers, we get the input from our correspondents from around the world, people in the field, and of course we look at the wealth of information, financial, statistical that's on the internet. And we come up with this index. And this year, Panama came out atop again.
And why is that?
It's always in the top 5 or 6 because
it ranks within the top rankings of most of those categories. For instance, it's very affordable. It's close to the U.S. and it has an accommodating climate where accommodating means no ice and snow. Really.
I like that.
Yeah, right. We do too.
Yeah, coming from the Midwest.
Healthcare is excellent.
And they've been dealing with North Americans for a century because of the canal. So they have a built-in economic engine in the canal. They know North Americans. They like North Americans. We've been down there for a century. It's easy to fit in. And the expat community there is large and diverse. North American expats are all over the country. So it's very easy to settle into as well. It's just got a lot going for it.
Well, give us an idea about the cost of living. Say, what is the average cost for renting an apartment?
Or buying a condo?
Yeah, it depends on where you live. Just like in the US, if you live in a city, it will be more expensive than if you live in a small rural community somewhere. So a small rural community, you could probably rent a nice apartment or usually a house in a rural community for, say, $500 for 2 bedrooms, etc. In the city, you'll be looking at $1,000 or up, depending on what level of luxury you want, whether you're renting a furnished home, where in the city it is, whether it has an ocean view or it's back in a more local neighborhood, etc. But we say that you can live well in Panama for $2,500 to $3,500 a month, which would include your rent.
Yeah, and that's all in for healthcare, food, entertainment, all of that.
That's everything.
That's great.
Yeah. Excluding travel, but you won't want to go anywhere if you're in Panama because the weather is fabulous. But of course, with all of these countries on the index, any place in the world, you can spend as much or as little as you want. But if you're in a nice little community and living like a local, you can save a lot of money. And healthcare savings are kind of extraordinary too. When you take utilities and healthcare and property taxes off the top of most North American budgets, as you can do in Panama or in Mexico or in any Central or South American or tropical destination, you end up with big savings, big savings.
I can see that. And I'm thinking, as you're talking about those numbers, we spend a little bit of time in Naples, Florida. And I think that, I don't know about rental prices. Well, I do during the season, the high season.
Yeah.
And you easily spend $20,000 to $30,000 a month if you're going to be, close to the beach. And I'm wondering, that would probably translate in Panama. You could probably get something close to the beach for what, $1,500 a month or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a good bet, and it depends on what community and how close to the beach. But for $1,250 to $1,500 a month, you get a nice place, real close to the beach.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I think one of the things too that goes into this consideration, if you are a golfer or you have expensive hobbies, then your cost of living is going to be a little bit higher, but it won't be nearly as high as it is in the United States. I mean, there are great golf courses all over Panama, Mexico, Costa Rica. So if you like that kind of thing, you can find them, and you can enjoy your hobbies, but it will cost you a lot less.
And the people that you've talked to that have moved, they probably come from all walks of life. You can't say that there are people who are from particular professions or parts of the country. What do you see as characteristics of the people you've come to know who decided to live abroad?
They almost to a person have a certain sense of adventure, because it takes a little bit of a sense of adventure to think about moving outside your comfort zone in the first place. And we talk about moving abroad like it's something that everybody will do eventually, but in reality, not a lot of people will move away from the community that they're comfortable in and the community that
they're
know.
just not cut out for it.
They're just not cut out, and that's fine.
Right.
You shouldn't have to move out of your comfort zone if you don't want to. But if you're at a point in life where you could live in Mexico if you wanted, you could live in Panama if you wanted, you could live in Portugal if you wanted, and you gave it a try and you liked it, it's doable. It's eminently doable. But you have to have that sense of adventure first to go, yeah, I could do that. I could give it a try. Mm-hmm. And it really doesn't make any difference, as you say, if you're in the professions, if you worked in heating and air conditioning all your life, if you were a teacher, if you were a doctor, it really doesn't matter. We've met them all over there. We've met them all out in the big world.
So what percentage do you think of the people who move, for example, to Mexico or Central America, choose to earn income while they're there in some form?
Oh, wow.
That's a growing number.
Yeah.
And I think has been and will continue to be accelerated by the pandemic and so many people working from home and so many employers seeing that they can have employees that work remotely. So we're seeing a lot more young people. They call it the Zoom boom, who are going to some of these places and digital nomads who find that they can live and work everywhere. People our age are doing it as well. They're doing consulting work. They're continuing to work in the field and the job that they have for years, because they can do it online or they can do it part-time or whatever. So that's a big growing concern.
That was one of the positive things from COVID, as far as I'm concerned. A huge number of North Americans went, I can do this from home. If I can work from home, if I can do what I'm doing now from home, I can do it from anywhere there's an internet connection, anywhere on the planet. Why wouldn't I do this from Prague, Czechoslovakia? Why wouldn't I do it from the Dalmatian coast? Why wouldn't I do it from Bangkok? Why wouldn't I do it from a Mexican beach?
Now, what are some of the other countries that made the list?
I just happen to have the list up here.
Oh, you do? How convenient.
Yeah, and I want you to talk about Portugal too, because that's
popular.
That's number 4 on our list.
Let me give you the top 10 right now. Starting from number 1 was Panama. Number 2 is Costa Rica. Those two countries often change first and second places. Number 3 is Mexico. I don't think Mexico's ever been out of the top 5. Portugal is number 4 because a lot of people are getting turned on to Portugal and the Algarve and the possibilities there. Ecuador is next, just because it's probably the best bang for buck in the Western Hemisphere. You don't give up anything, and it's amazingly affordable to live in.
Gorgeous.
Colombia is next because it's right next door, and it's a modern, bustling, booming economy. And then there's France and Malta and Spain, which are all European destinations that are rising because the cost of living is getting better and better and better when you use American dollars in Europe because of the exchange rates.
Right.
And it's familiar for North Americans to live in Europe almost without exception, no matter what country you're in, especially Western Europe. It feels familiar. You kind of know how things work.
Familiar with the culture.
And it's easy to settle into an environment like that. So those were the top contenders this year.
And then number 10 is Uruguay.
Number 10 is Uruguay. Yeah.
Okay.
So you would agree, though, that the European countries, generally speaking, the cost of living is going to be significantly higher than Central America. Is that true?
People who live there say it's not significantly higher, that there are certain items that cost less in Europe. So we have always, Dan and I have lived in Latin America for 20 years, so we're more familiar with that. And we had always had this perception that Europe would be higher, but our friends who live there say that that's not true on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
And they have the numbers to prove it.
When people think of Europe, they think of Paris, London, Dublin, Berlin.
The tourist places.
Those are incredibly expensive places to live, even for Europeans. But there are cities on our side of the pond, Mexico City, Quito, Ecuador, Panama City, which
they're higher cost as well.
Are the equal in every way of those places, but relatively less expensive. But in a Latin American context, those would be expensive places to live.
Yeah, I think people are surprised that there are bargains in Europe, even purchasing real estate. I was, this has been about 6 months ago, so it's recent. I was talking with someone who was an investor in vacation properties in Italy. And he said that Italy, maybe because they were hit real hard by the coronavirus and the front end, so they had huge problems at the time. So their market was vulnerable. And he showed me, he brought up online these listings that were not far from Florence, a neighboring city to Florence. Beautiful. And just like you can see listings in the U.S., you go online, like Realtor.com. It was the same thing over there. And you could look at this property. It was like $250,000, which may not sound cheap to some people, but others listening to this are thinking, wow, this is a big, beautiful Mediterranean type home and in a gorgeous location, it was much less than it would have cost for something like that in the U.S.
And France is the same way. You can find places near a small town out in the country in France that are very affordable to buy and to rent. Portugal, the same way. Portugal is probably one of the most affordable places in Western Europe to live right now. And if you're not living right in Lisbon, if you're not living in the hot spots on the coast, you can get some real bargains, even compared to U.S. prices. Yeah.
Right. And I think, the 2008 economic downturn, the global economic crash back then was still sort of being felt in Europe. And then they were hit by the pandemic, like you said. So the prices there have been stagnant for quite a while. And I think we're going to see that change, but it's still a bargain to go to Europe and to buy property there.
Yeah, especially with prices going crazy in the U.S. It's getting to where you can't.
That's right. Yeah.
People who think they can no longer afford a vacation home based on the prices you're mentioning, there are alternatives. So Portugal interests me, and maybe the EU generally. So can you talk a little bit about how difficult is it to get permission to go into a country where you don't have a passport, obviously, but you want to stay for at least a year? Is it about equally difficult, whether it's the EU or whether it's Central America? Talk about any hurdles you have with that, or if there are any.
Staying a year any place is a challenge because anywhere you go, you'll be starting off on a tourist visa. And most tourist visas are 30, 60, or 90 days, maybe 3 months. Then you can extend, you can work on getting a resident visa, and all those visa regimes are different from country to country. Europe, I don't think, is any different. What Europe now has going for it is a new digital nomad visa scheme that seems to be getting popular, especially in Eastern Europe. There are countries, Czechoslovakia is one as well. If you want to work online, you can get a visa to do that for a year. If you can demonstrate that you have a valid business, that you operate it via the internet, you can qualify for a visa that will let you stay there for a year to ply that trade. And those are renewable. That's one of the things that have happened with the advent of the internet and with online working. But as far as just heading someplace and going, I want to stay here a year, you'll always have to start out with a tourist visa, I think, and then delve into that particular visa situation of the country that you're in.
So let's use then Portugal as an example. Portugal, let's say that your goal was to spend a significant amount of time there. Say a year was the goal. So it sounds like you can't then enter with the confidence that you'll get a year, but it sounds like you can be confident. You're saying that you can get 3 months, a month to 3 months, and that there's a good chance after that you could maybe get a chance to stay longer.
An extension?
Sure.
Right. Portugal has had what's called a golden visa, and they are just now sort of re-looking at that and deciding what they're going to do with that golden visa. So this would be a good time, if you're interested in Portugal, to look at Portugal and see if you qualify for that golden visa and act on that before they make changes to that program. It's my understanding that has been pretty easy to qualify for residence visa under that program, but that is changing now.
And again, the challenge is all of these requirements are changing because of COVID, especially in the Schengen zone in Europe. I believe it used to be possible to write out your tourist visa, take a trip to some other place in the Schengen zone, which would reset your visa and come back for another 3 months. I honestly don't know if that's possible anymore. Things have changed a lot in the last year or two. The place to find out is on the International Living webpage. If you go to internationalliving.com, there's an entire drop-down section on Portugal. It gives relative cost of livings for different metropolitan areas, the countryside, visa requirements, what the healthcare system is like. All of that stuff is updated as often as necessary. So
a resident visa is typically good for a year. Is that true? Is that correct?
again, every country is
can vary.
different.
Depends on the country.
And it depends. Like we have permanent residency in Mexico. So ours is good for now, from now on.
We're permanent residents in Mexico.
How did you get that?
How do you qualify for that coming from the United States?
In Mexico, you have to show a certain amount of income, and maybe it's $2,000 for a couple. I'm not sure what it is right now.
$1,500 to $2,000.
Yeah, something like
typical.
that. And then you just go to the immigration office and you have your paperwork, and they give you a resident visa after.
It's bureaucracy. It's labyrinthine bureaucracy. It's rarely easy, but it's perfectly doable. It's no different than dealing with the DMV in the United States, depending on where you live.
So you don't have to give up your citizenship then?
No.
Okay.
No.
And
In
if
fact, you can't give up your citizenship unless you purposely renounce it at a U.S. consulate. You'll always be a U.S. citizen unless you do that, no matter what.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's really
no reason to do that.
Even then, they wouldn't accept it on the grounds that you are incompetent to make a decision.
Probably. Yeah. They
Right.
want us to pay taxes for as long as we possibly
Exactly.
can.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can't even escape. Don't get me started on this, but some people who have decided they've had it, with high taxes or whatnot, and they've decided they're going to leave the U.S. Well, up to, I don't know when the law changed, but say prior to 30 years ago, you could just leave. But now they got you going out the door. You actually pay a portion of the assets that you leave the country with.
Yeah.
That's if you renounce your citizenship.
Yeah, that's right. If you decide you're
Yeah.
leaving America, and I should make that clear. That's not to go live in Mexico.
Right.
But it's just shocking that even if you decide to leave the country and give it up, renounce your citizenship, you will get taxed on your assets come leaving the country.
You have to tote up everything that you own and everything that you're worth before they'll take your passport from you. And they'll decide how much they want of it. Yeah.
So now, do the two of you still own property in the United States?
We do. We have a little bullhole condo that we bought in Omaha when our kids moved here so that we would have a place to stay when we came to visit, and we could rent it on Airbnb when we're not here, that kind of thing. So,
and we have an 8-year-old granddaughter. So she's like a magnetic attractor. One of the reasons that we started spending more and more time in the United States.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we got caught here when COVID hit. But it just behooved us to have a place where we could hole up to be as close to her as we wanted to be during her formative years.
And do you find that most people who do this spend a substantial or the entire year living abroad? There are people who maintain properties here, even if it's multi-years abroad. Yeah.
Sure.
yeah, I think you have all ends of the spectrum. You have people who completely sell everything, which is what we did when we left in 2000, when we left the United States. We sold everything and moved with our dog and a couple of suitcases. And then slowly over the years, we bought some rental properties to have some income coming in when we retire and that kind of thing. And
let me ask you, what is it? I'm interested. What is it that prompted you to do this? Did you acquire your position with this publication that I was talking about earlier that you all have talked about? And people need to definitely, you have an interest in this subject, definitely look up. It's called internationalliving.com. It's a marvelous publication. Did your relationship with that organization come first and then you decided to move?
It's her fault.
I was a subscriber to that little black and white newsletter 20 years ago, like you, and just sort of fell in love with that dream of moving overseas. We were working in advertising and marketing at the time, really high paced. It was during the .com boom.
Yeah,
and,
I remember those days.
We were really, really working hard, and every chance we got, we would go to some warm tropical place and go scuba diving, and kept thinking, oh, wow, wouldn't this be great if we could live somewhere like this? And international living kind of really sparked that dream. So we had thought about how we could do this. We were much younger back then, still in our prime earning years. So we knew we would have to make a living if we were to do this. We thought about becoming dive guides or buying a B&B or buying a small business somewhere, and weren't sure we really wanted to be business owners. And then this opportunity came about to be able to work for International Living, work online. I think we were one of the first adopters of that, being able to work online, send in our writing and our doing what we had really done our whole lives, is work as writers.
Yeah.
And
Filing stories from abroad.
But how did that
deadline?
How did that opportunity though develop? Did you were receiving the magazine and you contacted them?
Remember snail mail? I sent a letter to the publisher who she had just moved to Ireland at the time. I sent a letter and it ended up on her desk. And it so happened they were looking for somebody in Ecuador, which wasn't where we had considered going. We wanted to go. We thought we would end up in Belize or somewhere like that. And
we had to look up Ecuador, actually.
She actually got on the phone then and called us and said, have you guys ever thought about Ecuador? Why don't you go there and see if you like it and see how you would feel about that? And we went to Ecuador and ended up that we loved it. And it's sort of just snowballed from there. But it all started with that little black and white newsletter and a snail mail resume sent to Ireland.
I love that story.
To be fair to Susan, somewhere in there, we were in the house in the middle of a Nebraska winter, and we were hearing the furnace go. And Susan said, there are places in the world where you can live and it never snows. You don't have to worry about dying if you get locked out of the house.
That's my kind of a place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that got my attention.
So your relationship, though, deepened with international travel, or international living, rather, is that you originally were a writer. Then what was the next step in your relationship with international living?
Well, we ended up going to Ecuador in 2001. Actually, it was right after 9/11. So, the whole world was in upheaval. That seems to be like sort of our, our life story. If there's upheaval, we're kind of in the middle of it somehow. But we were actually in Paris at an international living conference. They wanted to meet us, get to know us when 9/11 happened. And so we weren't able to come back to the States for an extra week because no flights were coming back. And our house had been sold and we had this plan to go to Ecuador. And then at that point, you're kind of like, well, should I go or should I hunker down like everybody else is doing? But we decided,
we knew that if we didn't do it, we'd never know how it would turn out. We at least got to give it a shot and see how it works. So we did. And it seemed right after 9/11 seemed like a good time to explore other places.
Nobody was traveling. So we were
right.
one of, we were in Ecuador for a year and rarely saw fellow Americans, except for the small number that lived there. When we got to Ecuador, we could basically count the expat retirees. I mean, we
knew all
Brits
the U.S.
there.
expats,
yeah,
for
there
sure.
were Brits there who were working in the oil industry, but retirees, this was kind of something new. And now there are thousands.
Now there are thousands. But at that time, we thought, you know what? Mexico might be a more promising place to write about for U.S. expats at this time. So we talked our way into Mexico. And then where did we go after that?
Then we went to Panama, Nicaragua, back to Mexico, back to Ecuador.
You two have a glamorous life. You really
that's
do.
The word for it. Yeah.
It sounds glamorous, but it's just our life. I don't know.
And every time we moved, we realized that it was easier and easier to do because the places we were moving to were not expensive. Culturally, they weren't hard to get to know, to move into. There were at least some expats in all of these places that we could network with and find out something about. And we just kind of became serial relocators.
Well,
every couple of years we'd go.
To what extent, though, do you learn the local language? I guess most of these countries, it would be Spanish that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Have you acquired, did you have any Spanish ability before you went?
We thought we did, but we didn't.
Well, but you thought you did, though.
Yeah.
True?
It's different when you get on the ground.
Right.
And what we did quickly, especially when we got to our first posting in Ecuador, we quickly learned restaurant and taxi Spanish. Then you can get where you need to go and get what you want to eat. And everything.
Learned how to order a pizza on the phone. That was hard.
Everything after that is just icing on the cake. There are so many U.S. expats abroad and so many locals in these countries want to practice their English on you that we never became, I guess, what you'd call fluent.
We're functional.
We're very functional.
Functional, okay.
Fluency, we move around too much and change milieus too often to actually work on our fluency. But functionality has served us well for 20 years.
Dan and Suzan, I have to ask you, 20 years ago when you decided to do this, did you have family and friends that said, come on, guys, this is crazy, and tried to talk you out of it?
I don't think anybody tried to talk us out of it, but we thought they would all come and visit us. And they didn't, really. I mean, with a few exceptions, but they were not as sold on the ideas. Definitely not as sold as we were. But
there were a lot of people who said, "Wow, I envy you guys. I wish that I could do that. I'm going to come and see what this is all about as soon as you get over there." And like Suzan said, rarely showed up.
Right.
But wait, now, in fairness, these friends are mainly in Omaha, right? Versus
right, but
versus LA.
People in Omaha travel too.
Yeah.
Well,
and Omaha's a wonderful place. It's my hometown. I love it. There are just places that are a lot more comfortable and cheaper to live, and that's where we like to live.
So when you decided to go down there, you given where you were in your career, unlike people who are retired, not to mention you have opportunities now, as we've talked about, to still earn significant money. But you guys went down there at a time in your lives that even with this gig with international living, I have to believe that you made a decision to cut your income potentially, because couldn't you have earned more as a professional at that time here in the U.S.?
For sure.
Oh, yeah.
For sure. But we were sort of all about adventure. But we also knew that we would be able to live for less by going overseas. So when you kind of do all of that economic, when you do all the math, it's like I could stay here and I can earn $100,000 a year and spend most of it to live here. Or I can go there and I only have to earn $50,000 a year and I don't even have to spend that much.
You can save. We were making really good money at our businesses before we left the United States, but we couldn't save any money. As soon as we moved abroad, we were able to save money because the difference in expenses was that dramatic. We didn't give up anything. We still had great health care. We still got, often we didn't have 15 choices of roasted red peppers at the grocery store. Sometimes there was only one or two choices.
Right.
Or you had to make them yourself.
But for the quality of life that we got for as little as we were spending, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah, just well worth it.
So on the subject of healthcare, of course, you have accessibility to the United States, but I've heard good things about the quality of healthcare in some parts of Central America, more Costa Rica. But can you talk about healthcare in Mexico or other places you've lived?
Yeah, Dan is better at this because he's had several surgeries, rotator cuff.
I'm falling apart. And
I know what that's like.
I got one rotator cuff fixed in Quito, Ecuador from a sports doctor who actually studied at UT Austin. I got my other shoulder worked on in Merida, Mexico, from another specialist there. Had both my eyes worked on
in Panama
and in Ecuador. Every major metropolitan area that we've ever been in has at least one or two medical facilities that are the equal of anything we've seen in the United States. And to be fair, the United States hasn't ranked number one on any assessment of healthcare systems and outcomes for quite a while now. France is always at the top. Most European countries are at or near the top. Costa Rica, Colombia have well-rated healthcare systems. So we have no problem with offshore healthcare.
Never been worried about that.
Now, how do you pay for it, if I may ask? Is it generally affordable enough to where you pay out of pocket, or how does that work?
We've always had private insurance. And private insurance, of course, is much cheaper in these countries as well. If you are a legal resident of a country, you can buy private health insurance, or sometimes qualify for their national health plan, which is what is so great about Costa Rica, because they have probably one of the best national health systems in the world, and it's very affordable.
It takes a resident visa, though. You can't just go down there and join the national health system. You become a resident, and then you can avail of that, which is true in most places. Residency is required for the national health scheme, but everybody has private health insurance companies, just as we do here in the United States. And a lot of expats will pay out of pocket for the things that they can afford, be members of the national healthcare plan for stuff that's a little more complicated, and then have private insurance with a cancer rider or a heart and lung rider, something like that, in case of catastrophic stuff. So you can cobble together a healthcare plan in many countries in Latin America in a way that you just can't do in the United States.
So what is the typical cost for private insurance monthly?
It depends on your age, your pre-existing conditions, much like it does here. But I think the last time we bought it in Mexico, it was about $3,000. I mean, pesos, but it was, if you relate it to dollars, about $3,000 for the two of us, for a comparable plan as to what we probably would have bought in the States. I think we had a $3,500 deductible, something like that.
Yeah, we have to add that we both, during the time that we've been in the United States during COVID, now qualify for Medicare. We reached a certain age, and Medicare is one of the best national health care plans on the planet.
We're finding it is expensive, though.
But it's getting increasingly expensive. So you have to really make a determination. We know some expats living abroad who have completely given up their Medicare plans. They don't pay for Part B anymore. They've let their Part A lapse. They've just gone out of the system. We know just as many who keep their Medicare current while they're living abroad in case they need to move back, in the case they need to come back and avail of the healthcare system here. So it really depends on what your personal situation is. But like I said, living in a place with a national healthcare service and affordable private insurance, you can cobble together a healthcare plan in ways that you really can't in the United States.
That's impressive. And I know that comes as shocking information, I think, to many people who assume that Central American countries are not banana republics, but certainly not comparable in terms of their quality of healthcare to the U.S. But I would further add that I think that a number of their doctors have been trained in the U.S. You mentioned somebody from UT Austin. So it might be that they'll have the same doctors that they would virtually otherwise have there.
Or in Europe. I had an eye doctor who trained in Sweden. So...
Yeah.
And typically those doctors who've trained internationally speak excellent English. So there's not that issue to worry about either. If you're in a country, if you're in a Spanish-speaking country, or if you're in France, you'll very often find a doctor that speaks English.
But like in the United States, these are the major metropolitan areas. The closer you are to a major metropolitan area, the better the services are, the better the healthcare is. That's the same all over the world.
Fortunately, most of these countries are so small that you typically are close to a major metropolitan area. It's not like the United States where, you've got Omaha and then you have Western Nebraska where they're really small little towns.
You flip a coin to go to Omaha or Denver for your healthcare. That's a long drive, man.
Yeah, I could, and you're right. I know how even in the United States, there's a huge difference between the qualities of care depending on where you are. And I grew up in Appalachia, not far from Knoxville, Tennessee, and and it just doesn't. There's not the quality of services there even today that there is
Right.
in St. Louis, which is where we are now.
Exactly.
Time flies whenever we talk to you guys. Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you about there's this program that's gotten some attention where you purchase. You don't exactly purchase citizenship, but you agree to purchase some level of real estate or investment in the country. I've talked to people who have had some interest in that. That's not for all of our viewers, but those who have the ability to make an investment. Do you have any opinions on that as a route to living in a country?
There are, I was going to mention that earlier when we were talking about getting visas in Europe. In many countries, a real estate purchase allows you to get an investor visa. For instance, in Ecuador, I believe when we lived there, it was only $25,000. If you bought a property worth $25,000, that would give you a resident visa. In some countries, it's $150,000. I think Costa Rica now maybe, or Panama's $200,000. If you buy a condo, that will get you a resident visa. So those, I think, are excellent ways to get a resident visa in some of these countries. Others, if you're looking to, if you just want to invest in the Caribbean, for instance, and you don't really plan to live there, you can, it's called CIP.
It's essentially an investor visa.
Yeah.
There are two major ways that many of the North Americans we know, get their resident visa. One is a pensionado visa. You apply as a retiree, which means you have to show that you have $1,000, $1,250, $1,500 a month coming in from an annuity, a retirement plan, some dependable source. The other way is an investment visa. You see the house that you want, you pay $175,000 for it. That puts you over the limit for your investment visa, and that qualifies you for residency as well. So being a pensionado and being a property owner are the two major ways that we know a lot of people get their residency visas in these countries.
Any comments on, we haven't talked about islands in the Caribbean. Those sometimes get a lot of attention. Maybe they're more expensive, perhaps, to live in. Any comments on any of those? You haven't lived there personally, on Cayman or Virgin
No,
Islands.
but we spent a lot of time in Belize, which they say
Aruba.
is the biggest island attached to the mainland in the Caribbean.
Well, I've heard good things I've heard a mixed bag about Belize. Do you like Belize?
We love Belize.
Yeah. I think as we get older, we don't want to live in a hot, humid beach environment anymore.
Yeah.
We like being at the beach, but we want to be
Comfortable.
We want to be comfortable. Yeah. And so that's, we started this thinking we wanted to dive our way around the world. We're a little too old for that now, even though we still sort of like that culture and that environment. But the Caribbean is a beautiful place to live. And there are, if you're looking for, tax breaks, some of those countries offer some really good options.
But you're saying, though, it's pretty much hot year round.
Well, and it's an island. I mean, I'd have to think hard right now to live on a tropical island. They're great places to visit, but that's where, for my money, that's where they keep the sand and the bugs. And I can live really well without either of those things. I'm comfortable at about 5,000 feet. I'm in
the tropics, which is perfect, perfect climate, really.
Right.
Yeah, I get it that everything on an island is very expensive because it all has to be imported.
Right.
Exactly.
So you're paying for that additional transportation for everything.
Right.
Grand
There
Cayman,
are big islands,
super expensive.
Yeah.
And it's, it sounds great to swing on a beach and eat fish tacos, but you do that for 3 or 4 months in a row, and you start thinking, man, there's more to life than this.
A Jimmy Buffett song.
Yeah.
I think I would turn into that character in that song of his if I had to hang out on an island 365 days a year. I talked to somebody who she had this fantasy. She went to law school. She was a little younger than I was, but when she graduated law school, she had this fantasy of living in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So she did it. I mean, I guess you can lawfully do it. It's like you all point out, there are so many options that people have that they don't think they have.
Right.
And so as a result, sadly, they go to their grave, I think many people, because they just didn't do
the research.
Yeah, they didn't get out, as you all said earlier, the comfort zone. Well, she was, to her credit, she thought, this sounds wonderful. I'll go and get a job there. She did. She got a job as a public defender, I think, in Sharm-el-Sheikh, I think is the name of this city. So anyway, but she said, man, after living on a tropical island like that for about 2 years, she was so tired of it. I mean, it's the sameness.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of sameness. And if you like that, and there are people who do.
Exactly.
But she fled.
It got old real fast.
And came back to the U.S. But
there's a big difference between being on vacation and living somewhere.
Very
and what
true.
we always recommend is being somewhere where you think you might want to retire or start a second life long enough to find out what it's like to actually hook up your utilities, get your mail, what the internet connection is like, how they stock the grocery stores, see what it's like to actually live there instead of just being on vacation, because they're two different things.
Very different.
You guys are a wealth of wisdom, the life experiences you all have had for the last 20 plus years. So we'd love to be able to have you back again and talk about things as they change, and I'm sure they will. And meanwhile, I really want people to check out International Living. It's a marvelous publication. I like the idea of physically holding a publication, but I guess now it's all online, right?
No, you can still get the magazine delivered to your door every month.
Keep them right there on your coffee table if you want.
Well, I hope some listening to this you'll change their lives based on this show, maybe.
Definitely.
Anyway, we thank you for taking time to visit with us, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks, guys. Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another episode of Life's Third Act. Till next time, take care.
You've been listening to Life's Third Act, a podcast for thriving in retirement, sponsored by TuckerAllen, your estate and elder law advisors. Each week, we discuss topics and answer questions to help you better plan for your future. For more information, visit TuckerAllen.com. Subscribe and listen again next week for another edition of Life's Third Act. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.